The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Royal Academy like angry fists. Inside the grand exhibition hall, crystal chandeliers swung wildly as screams ripped through the air. Delia Harlow stood alone in the center of the chaos, her chest heaving. In one trembling hand, she clutched a painter's knife, its blade still dripping crimson. Before her, the enormous portrait she had spent 6 months perfecting lay in ruins. Long, savage slashes tore across the face of Lady Worthington, one of the most powerful women in London. Thick drops of Delia's own blood, mixed with the wet oil paint, turning the once flawless silk gown into a bleeding wound. "I will not paint lies anymore." Delia's voice cracked like thunder. "Not for your titles, not for your gold, not anymore." Gasps exploded around her. Ladies pressed gloved hands to their mouths. Gentlemen shouted for the guards. Delia didn't move. Rainwater from her soaked hair streamed down her face, mingling with hot tears she refused to acknowledge. Her fingers burned where the blade had cut deep, but the pain felt distant, almost welcome. At least it was honest. Heavy boots thundered across the marble floor. 2 uniformed guards seized her arms roughly, nearly lifting her off the ground. "Get your hands off her." The deep, commanding voice sliced through the noise like a whip. From the upper balcony, a tall figure in black stepped into the light. The crowd parted instinctively. Even the guards hesitated. Rowan, the Duke of Thornbridge, descended the stairs with lethal calm. His smoke-gray eyes locked onto Delia with an intensity that made the entire room fall silent. He had come tonight only to escape another endless evening of empty conversation. Instead, he had witnessed something raw, something real, something that shattered the careful silence he had wrapped around his heart for 7 long years. The guards loosened their grip, but did not release her. "Your Grace," one stammered, "this woman has destroyed a valuable commission. She must be arrested." Rowan's gaze never left Delia's face. "Release her," he said quietly. The words carried the weight of absolute authority. The guards obeyed at once. Delia swayed on her feet, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how badly her hand was bleeding, how every eye in the room now burned into her, like judgment itself. She lifted her chin anyway, refusing to look away from the powerful Duke who had just stepped into her ruin. Why, she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why would you stop them?" Rowan studied her for a long moment. Something flickered behind those cold gray eyes. Pain recognition. He wasn't sure himself. "Because I know what it costs to stay silent," he said at last, so softly only she could hear. "And I'm tired of watching truth bleed out while the world applauds the lie." He removed his own fine black coat and draped it over her shivering shoulders. The fabric still carried the warmth of his body. "Come with me, Miss Harlow." Delia's heart slammed against her ribs. Every instinct screamed danger. This man was one of the most powerful nobles in England. His name alone could crush her, or save her. She thought of the debtor's prison waiting if she was charged. She thought of the small room above the bakery where she could no longer afford to live. She thought of her father's dying words, "Paint what you see, Delia. Never what they want you to see." She swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" A ghost of a smile touched Rowan's severe mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll discover how cold a London cell truly is. While I stand here wondering why a woman brave enough to destroy her own masterpiece would suddenly choose fear." Delia searched his face. Behind the marble mask of a duke, she glimpsed something haunted, something that mirrored the emptiness she had carried since her father's death and the scandal that had branded her dangerous. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. Delia took one shaky step forward. Rowan offered his arm. She hesitated only a heartbeat, then placed her blood-stained fingers on his sleeve. As they walked through the parting crowd, whispers rose like smoke behind them. What is the Duke of Thornbridge doing with that scandalous little painter? He'll regret this by morning. Rowan leaned slightly closer, his voice low and steady against her ear. Let them talk. Tonight, Miss Harlow, you are under my protection. The carriage door closed behind them with a solid final sound. Rain lashed the windows as the horses pulled away from the Royal Academy, carrying Delia Harlow deeper into a world she had never belonged to, and a man who had sworn never to feel anything again. Yet, as he watched her press a handkerchief to her wounded hand, something inside Rowan's carefully guarded chest cracked open for the first time in years. A single dangerous thought formed in the silence. One shattered portrait had just changed everything, and neither of them would ever be the same. The heavy oak doors of Thornbridge Manor closed behind Delia with a sound like a final breath. She stood in the entrance hall, still wearing the Duke's coat, her bandaged hand throbbing in time with her racing heart. The grandeur of the house pressed down on her marble floors that echoed every footstep, towering portraits of stern ancestors who seemed to watch her with cold disapproval. Rowan spoke little during the long carriage ride. Now he gestured toward a wide hallway with the barest tilt of his head. Your rooms are in the east wing. Tomorrow you begin. That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. Just the quiet command of a man who had long ago decided words were dangerous. The next morning, Delia was led to the private gallery, a long sunlit room lined with empty frames and half-finished canvases. Light poured through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced like forgotten memories. She set up her easel with trembling hands. Rowan arrived exactly at 10. He sat in a high-backed chair by the window, posture rigid, jaw tight. He did not smile. He did not speak beyond the necessary. Paint what you must. Delia dipped her brush. She tried to capture the sharp line of his cheekbone, the storm gray of his eyes. But every stroke felt wrong, too polished, too safe. That night after the household slept, she returned alone to the gallery, carrying only a small candle and a fresh canvas. Mrs. Eleanor Graves, her old nursemaid now running an orphanage just beyond the estate, had slipped her a quiet note earlier. Paint. The truth, my girl, even if it frightens them, frightens. Delia worked in secret. She painted Rowan not as the untouchable Duke, but as the man she had glimpsed in the Rain's shoulders, slightly bowed eyes, carrying shadows no title could hide. She let the colors bleed into darkness around him, then added the faintest thread of light breaking through. She painted quickly, honestly, dangerously. 3 nights later, Rowan found her there. He stood in the doorway, candlelight flickering across his face. His gaze moved from Delia's exhausted eyes to the canvas still wet on the easel. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. You were told to paint formal portraits, he said at last. His voice was low, controlled, but something dangerous simmered beneath it. Not this. Delia set down her brush slowly. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. I painted what I saw. Rowan stepped closer. He stared at the portrait, at the raw loneliness she had captured, at the way she had refused to soften the hard lines of grief around his mouth. His hand clenched at his side. You have no right. I know, Delia whispered. Her voice cracked. But someone should see you. The real you. Not the Duke everyone bows to. For one terrifying moment, she thought he might destroy the canvas the way she had destroyed Lady Worthington's portrait. Instead, Rowan reached out and touched the edge of the painting with 2 fingers, as if afraid it might burn him. His breath hitched. "You remind me of her," he said so quietly she almost missed it. "My sister. She also refused to paint pretty lies." He turned away sharply, but not before Delia caught the flash of pain in his eyes, deep old, carefully buried. The next afternoon, tension thickened the air. Lord Harlan Voss arrived unannounced, striding into the gallery as if he owned it. Tall, handsome, and polished to a dangerous shine, he smiled at Delia with teeth that reminded her of a wolf. "Miss Harlow," he drawled. "How fascinating to find you here. Still causing trouble, I see." Delia's stomach twisted. She remembered the rumors Harlan had helped spread years ago, whispers that her father had forged paintings, that she herself was little better than a clever fraud. Rowan entered moments later, his expression unreadable. Harlan clapped him on the shoulder with false warmth. "Rowan, old friend, you really should be more careful who you bring into your home. Some scandals have a way of sticking and spreading." Delia felt the threat coil around her like smoke. That evening, alone in her room, she sat at the small desk and stared at her bandaged hand. Fear pressed against her ribs. She could stay silent. She could paint the safe, beautiful lies they all wanted. She could survive. Or she could keep painting the truth and risk losing everything again. A soft knock startled her. Mrs. Eleanor Graves slipped inside, carrying a tray of tea. "You're shaking, child," the older woman said gently. "The Duke? He carries heavy silence. But silence never healed anyone. Not his sister. Not him." Delia looked up, eyes burning. "I'm afraid, Eleanor. What if my paintings only make things worse?" Mrs. Graves touched Delia's cheek with motherly tenderness. "Then at least the truth will have been spoken, and some truths are worth the storm they bring." Later that night, Delia returned to the gallery once more. She began a new canvas, smaller, more intimate. This time she painted Rowan's hands, strong, capable, yet somehow lonely. In the corner of the painting, almost hidden in shadow, she added the faint outline of a young woman's face, the sister he never spoke of. As the candle burned low, Delia heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew it was him. Rowan stopped a few paces away. The silence between them felt alive now, charged, fragile, full of things neither dared name. He looked at the new painting for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "You're tearing down walls I've spent years building, Miss Harlow." Delia's brush paused. "Perhaps those walls were never meant to protect you," she said softly, "only to keep you trapped inside." Rowan did not answer. But when he left the gallery that night, he did not tell her to stop. And for the first time in 7 years, the Duke of Thornbridge lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the faint, terrifying warmth of light slowly creeping into the long shadows he had lived in for so long. The candle flame trembled as Delia's hand moved across the hidden canvas. She had locked the door to the small side gallery, the one no one ever entered after dark. Her heart pounded so violently she could feel it in her throat. Every brushstroke felt like a confession. She painted the truth she had uncovered in fragments, whispered conversations between servants, old letters half burned in the fireplace, and the broken expression on Rowan's face whenever his sister's name hovered too close to being spoken. Lady Amelia Rowan's younger sister had not taken her own life. Lord Harlan Voss, once his closest friend, had seduced her, used her innocence to cover his growing financial ruin, then abandoned her when the scandal threatened to expose him. Amelia had been pushed to the edge until despair became her only escape. Delia's brush shook as she layered shadow and light, showing a young woman's face twisted in betrayal. A man's hand, reaching not to save her, but to silence her. She stepped back, breath shallow. The painting was dangerous, raw, unforgivable. A soft creak behind her made her spin around. Captain Elias Blackwood stood in the doorway, his military bearing stiff, one hand still on the latch. His eyes widened as they fell on the canvas. "Miss Harlow?" His voice was low, rough with shock. "What have you done?" Delia's knees nearly buckled. She clutched the edge of the table for support. "I couldn't pretend anymore." Elias stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the painting. The scar across his cheek seemed to tighten. "Rowan doesn't know you've seen this, does he?" He swallowed hard. "He spent 7 years burying it. If Harlan discovers you've painted the truth..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, Delia barely slept. Every shadow in her room felt like Harlan's smile. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps coming to drag her away. The following week, the storm finally broke. They had returned to London for a grand soiree at Lord Worthington's residence, the same man whose wife's portrait Delia had once destroyed. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels, but the air felt poisoned. Delia stood near the edge of the crowd, in a simple dark green gown, trying to remain invisible. Rowan had insisted she attend. "They need to see you are under my protection," he had said. But protection felt fragile tonight. Lord Harlan Voss approached with deliberate slowness, a glass of wine in his hand, and malice in his eyes. "Miss Harlow," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to turn. "Still playing the artist, or are you now playing something far more dangerous?" Delia's mouth went dry. Harlan leaned in his voice, dropping to a venomous whisper that still carried. "I know what you've been painting in that dusty gallery. Accusing honorable men with your little brushes. How dare you drag old tragedies into the light just to save your own ruined reputation?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone murmured, "The scandalous painter again." Harlan raised his voice, turning the moment into performance. "I will not stand by while this woman destroys what remains of a noble family's honor. If necessary, I shall see her in court for slander and defamation." Delia felt the room tilt. Her bandaged hand throbbed. She wanted to run, to disappear into the night, to never pick up a brush again. She was poison. Everywhere she went, she brought ruin. Later, back at the townhouse, she stood alone in the dimly lit drawing room, staring at the covered canvas she had brought with her, the one that whispered Amelia's truth. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks and fell onto the cloth covering the painting, darkening the fabric like fresh blood. "I only wanted to help," she whispered brokenly. "Why does everything I touch turn to ash?" The door opened softly. Mrs. Eleanor Graves entered, her kind face lined with worry. She crossed the room without a word and pulled Delia into her arms. "My brave girl," she murmured against Delia's hair. "Art is not only for painting beauty. Sometimes it must paint justice, even when justice hurts." Delia clung to her shoulders, shaking. "But what if I destroy him in the process?" Mrs. Graves pulled back gently, cupping Delia's tear-streaked face. "Then you must trust that some men are strong enough to survive the truth and be reborn because of it." That same night, long after the house had gone quiet, a soft knock sounded at Delia's door. She opened it to find Rowan standing there, still dressed in his evening clothes, his face pale and drawn. He stepped inside without waiting for invitation, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Rowan's voice came rough and strained. "Elias told me what you painted." Delia's breath caught. She waited for anger, for dismissal, for the cold command to destroy it. Instead, Rowan crossed to the covered canvas and slowly pulled the cloth away. He stared at the image of his sister's final moments at the betrayal, the despair, the hand that had pushed instead of saved. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. "I swore I would never speak of her again," he said, voice cracking. "I swore silence would keep the pain buried." He turned to Delia, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But your brush, your damned honest brush, has dragged every ghost back into the light." Delia took a shaky step toward him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to." "Don't," Rowan interrupted, his voice raw. "Don't apologize for seeing what I was too coward to face." He reached out slowly, hesitantly, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. In that single touch, years of carefully maintained silence began to fracture. Rowan's hand lingered. "Stay," he said quietly, almost pleading. "Talk to me. Tell me why you risk everything, when you could have painted pretty lies and been safe." Delia looked up into his storm-gray eyes and saw the man beneath the Duke, lonely, haunted, and slowly, terrifyingly alive again. They sat together until the candles burned low, speaking in hushed voices about loss, about betrayal, about the heavy price of silence. And as the first pale light of dawn touched the windows, Rowan whispered words he had not spoken in 7 years. Her name was Amelia. Outside, the city began to wake. But inside that quiet room, something far more fragile and precious was beginning to stir, the first cracks in a heart long frozen in silence. The grand exhibition hall of the Royal Academy glowed under 1,000 candles, but the air felt heavy with unspoken threats. Delia stood before her covered canvas heart, hammering so fiercely she feared it might burst. This was the night, the moment she could no longer hide behind locked doors and whispered conversations. Tonight, the truth would burn in public. She had titled the painting simply, "Silent Ashes." When the velvet cloth was finally pulled away, a collective gasp swept through the elegant crowd. The painting showed a young woman's face, caught between light and shadow. Amelia's face, her eyes wide with betrayal, as dark flames licked at the edges of the frame. The colors screamed what words had buried for 7 years, a family silence devouring its own. Delia's voice trembled only slightly as she spoke to the gathered nobles. "This is not imagination. This is what silence does when it is chosen over truth." For one breathless moment, the entire hall seemed frozen. Then chaos erupted. Lord Harlan Voss shoved through the crowd, his face twisted with fury. His eyes locked on the painting like a man staring at his own execution. "You lying bitch," he snarled loud enough for everyone to hear. Before anyone could stop him, Harlan snatched a candelabra from a nearby table and hurled it at the canvas. Flames leaped instantly greedy and bright, racing across the oil paint. Screams filled the air. Ladies stumbled backward. Gentlemen shouted in panic. Delia didn't think. She lunged forward, throwing herself between the fire and the painting, arms outstretched. No heat seared her skin. Smoke stung her eyes. She felt the flames catch the edge of her sleeve as she desperately tried to beat them back with her bare hands. Strong arms suddenly wrapped around her waist, yanking her backward just as the canvas began to collapse in burning sheets. "Rowan." He pulled her against his chest, shielding her body with his own, while flames roared behind them. But he did not stay silent. "Enough," his voice thundered across the hall, raw and broken, carrying 7 years of buried agony. "It was you, Harlan. You seduced my sister. You used her to hide your debts, then abandoned her when she became inconvenient. Your greed pushed Amelia to her death." The words hung in the smoke-filled air like judgment itself. Harlan's face drained of color. He staggered back a step. "You have no proof Captain Blackwood does," Rowan cut in his voice, shaking with fury and something deeper liberation. "He has carried your secret long enough." Captain Elias Blackwood stepped forward from the crowd, his expression grave but steady. "It's true," he said clearly. "Harlan used me to destroy the letters Amelia wrote. I was young and foolish enough to believe it was loyalty, but I will no longer stay silent." The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs and cries. Delia swayed in Rowan's arms, pain blooming across her left arm where the flames had touched her. Blood trickled from a deep cut on her palm where she had grabbed the burning frame. A single drop fell onto the edge of the charred canvas, mixing with the ashes and melted paint, an accidental final stroke no artist could have planned. Rowan noticed the blood. His face crumpled. "Delia," he whispered, voice breaking completely. He sank to one knee right there amid the smoke and scattered embers cradling her injured hand, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "I was wrong," he said, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "All these years I believed silence would protect me, but it killed my sister, and it nearly killed you." He pressed his forehead to her knuckles, voice raw with emotion. "Your art didn't destroy me, Delia. It saved me. You saved me." Delia stared down at him, tears streaming freely now. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the scandalous daughter of a street painter. She didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt seen. Truly seen. The pain in her burned arm faded beneath the warmth of Rowan's touch and the weight of his confession. Around them, servants rushed with water to douse the remaining flames. Guests whispered furiously. But in that small circle of ashes and candlelight, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Rowan rose slowly, never releasing her hand. He pulled her closer, shielding her from the chaos, as Captain Blackwood continued speaking, his voice steady as he publicly condemned Harlan's actions. Harlan was already being surrounded by stern-faced gentlemen, his power crumbling with every passing second. Delia leaned her head against Rowan's chest, listening to the frantic beat of his heart. "I was so afraid," she whispered against his coat. "Afraid I would only bring you more pain." Rowan's arms tightened around her. "You brought light," he murmured into her hair, voice thick with emotion. "Even if it had to burn everything down first." As the smoke slowly cleared and the authorities moved in to escort Harlan away, Rowan looked down at Delia with eyes no longer guarded by ice. In the middle of the ruined exhibition hall, surrounded by whispers and judgment and the scent of charred canvas, he pressed a gentle kiss to her soot-streaked forehead. A promise. A beginning. And for the first time in 7 years, the Duke of Thornbridge allowed himself to feel everything he had once sworn never to feel again. The weeks that followed the fire were a whirlwind of justice and quiet transformation. Rowan moved with ruthless purpose. Using every ounce of his ducal power, he ensured Lord Harlan Voss faced the full weight of the law. Letters were presented, witnesses came forward, and the truth about Amelia's death spread through London like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Harlan's name, once spoken with respect, became a warning. Through it all, Rowan stood beside Delia in public. He escorted her to every necessary hearing, his hand steady at the small of her back. When whispers followed them, some cruel, some curious, he silenced them with a single cold look and a clear declaration. "Miss Delia Harlow saved my family from the poison of silence. Any man or woman who dares speak against her will answer to me." Delia felt the weight of those words settle around her shoulders like a warm cloak. For the first time, she walked through society not as the scandalous painter, but as the woman the Duke of Thornbridge chose to protect and cherish. One quiet afternoon at Thornbridge Manor, Rowan found her in the sunlit gallery. He looked different now. The hard lines around his eyes had softened, though the shadows of loss still lingered. He took her uninjured hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles over her knuckles. "Stay," he said simply. Delia's breath caught. "Not as my portrait artist," he continued, voice low and rough with feeling. "Stay as the woman who dared to paint what I was too afraid to see. Stay as the one who brought light back into this house." Delia searched his gray eyes, her heart trembling with both fear and hope. "I'm still afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that one day you'll wake up and regret letting someone see all your broken pieces." Rowan lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a lingering kiss there. "Then we'll be afraid together," he murmured, "because I no longer want to live behind walls. Not when you've shown me how beautiful the view can be on the other side." Before Delia could respond, the sound of small voices and laughter floated up from the entrance hall. Mrs. Eleanor Graves had arrived leading a group of wide-eyed children from the orphanage. Their faces lit with wonder as they stepped into the gallery where the surviving paintings still hung. One little girl, no more than 8, stopped in front of a smaller portrait Delia had painted weeks earlier, a simple study of sunlight breaking through dark clouds. "Is this hope?" the child asked softly, reaching out, but not quite touching the canvas. Delia knelt beside her, voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes hope looks like light finding its way through darkness." Mrs. Eleanor Graves watched with misty eyes. "You see, Delia, your honest brush doesn't only heal the painter. It gives hope to those the world has forgotten. These children need more than food and shelter. They need to know their stories matter too." That night, Delia made her decision. She took the generous payment offered for her final completed portrait and set aside a large portion to establish a free art school for orphaned and poor children, a place where they could learn to paint their own truths without fear or shame. Rowan supported her without hesitation, and so on a golden afternoon weeks later, they stood together in the private gallery at Thornbridge Manor. Before them hung the last painting Delia had created, a double portrait of the two of them. No titles, no masks, just Rowan and Delia as they truly were, his strong features softened by vulnerability, her eyes bright with quiet strength. Their hands were nearly touching in the center of the canvas, a single drop of light falling between them like a promise. Rowan stood behind her arms, wrapped loosely around her waist, his chin resting gently against her hair. "I made a new vow," he whispered, voice deep and tender. Delia tilted her head slightly, listening. No more silence. "From this day forward, I will speak for what matters. For truth, for justice, and for you." He turned her slowly in his arms until they faced each other. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, painting their faces in soft shades of amber and rose. The colors danced across the finished portrait behind them, a symbol of a life no longer defined by ashes, but rebuilt with honest strokes of courage and love. Delia reached up her fingers, brushing the line of his jaw with trembling tenderness. "I was so lost when I first came here," she said softly. "I thought my honesty would only destroy things. Instead, it helped us both find our way home." Rowan's eyes darkened with emotion. He cupped her face with both hands, thumbs gently wiping away the single tear that escaped down her cheek. "You are my home now, Delia Harlow." He leaned down, slowly giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of smoke and salvation, of pain finally spoken and love finally freed. It was gentle at first, hesitant, almost reverent, then deepened with all the longing they had both carried in silence for so long. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, Rowan smiled a real, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. "The portrait is finished," he murmured. "But our story is only just beginning." Delia laughed softly through happy tears, resting her head against his chest, where his heartbeat sounded strong and steady. Outside the tall windows, the sun continued to shine, casting warm golden light across the gallery, turning every scar, every burn mark, every tear into something beautiful. A finished painting, a healed heart, and two souls who had learned the hardest, most precious lesson of all courageous truth: may burn everything down, but only silence can truly destroy the soul. When we dare to face our darkest past, we finally step into the light we were always meant to find. Value this story brings you. This final chapter reminds us that real healing begins the moment we choose honesty over silence, and that love, when built on truth, can turn even the ashes of old pain into something breathtakingly beautiful. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories